You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. A busy week ahead at the U.S. Capitol. On Tuesday, President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, will appear before members of the Senate Judiciary Committee for his confirmation hearing. Kavanaugh, a law professor and judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, must be approved by the Judicial Committee before he's confirmed. But Democrats have voiced strong opposition over concerns that Kavanaugh, who would be a swing vote, might try to overturn the landmark 1973 ruling that upheld a legal right to an abortion and the pre-existing conditions protection under the Affordable Care Act.
These two rights, affordable health care and a woman's freedom to make sensitive health care decisions, hang in the balance with this nominee.
Kavanaugh's hearings, again, will begin on Tuesday. U.S. Senator John Kennedy is on that Judicial Committee, and he joins us now. Thanks for being on the show, Senator.
Thank you, Fred.
This is going to be a busy week for you guys. You just heard Chuck Schumer talking about his concerns. First of all, are Democrats justified in that concern?
Not what I've seen, not based on what I've seen so far. But having said that, I mean, this is a big deal. A Supreme Court position in the United States is the most powerful, unelected position in the most powerful country in all of human history. So there's no margin for error. I like what I see. I mean, I've read probably a third of the judge's opinions. I've read most of his law review articles. He's whip smart. He knows how to use a semicolon. He writes very well. I expect the Democrats to do everything they can, unfortunately, to stop his confirmation. My job on judiciary is to ask him tough questions, and that's what I intend to do, but I really like what I see, and I have a feeling he'll be able to answer the questions.
Well, we've already seen just over the past few days, Senate Democrats have called for a delay in these hearings. They want to put this off, and they cite a couple of reasons. One, they believe that President Trump could possibly face a criminal investigation. Couple that with some comments that Judge Kavanaugh has made where he has said he doesn't believe that a sitting president should be the subject of an investigation. They believe that's enough to go ahead and make sure that there's a delay in this process. What do you say to that?
It's all politics. They don't have the votes. I mean, if I had to guess today, I would say that we'll have all Republicans vote for Judge Kavanaugh, depending on how he does in the confirmation hearing. And we'll probably have at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 Democratic votes. Our Democratic friends know that. They know that they can't attack him on the merits, so they're going to throw everything they can against the wall and see if something sticks.
Do you think they're going to hammer him on his comments about sitting president?
You know, I hope they keep it courteous and on the subject. Now, I don't want to see this turn into a junior high school cafeteria food fight. But the Democratic base, which has moved to the left nationwide, is putting a lot of pressure on the Democratic senators. That's not an excuse. That's an explanation of what's driving them. And they expect them to stop this nomination. I don't think they will, but that's why God allowed us to vote. You know, once we get him through committee, and I think he'll come out of committee, then the fight will move to the floor of the Senate, and eventually we'll take a vote, and everybody stand up in front of God and country and say, I support a judge who understands the role of the judiciary, and that is that it's not to make law, it's to interpret the law, or you want a judicial activist who will rewrite the Constitution every other Thursday. That's basically what the Democrats want.
You've also been accused of just ramming this through and trying to get this process through without clearly vetting this candidate.
Yeah.
Republicans want this through, I think, before the midterms because they don't want this to go after the midterms. And for obvious reasons, there could be a switch of power in the House and possibly even the Senate. Is that a legitimate complaint from the Democrats?
No.
No?
What our real goal is, I mean, it's a complaint that they're making, but I don't think it's legitimate, Fred. Our goal on the Republican side is to have him confirmed by October 1, and here's why. The United States Supreme Court starts a new session on October 1, and we don't want to leave them one vote short, because otherwise you could have a 4-4 tie, and that means that the case can't really be decided. And so our goal is to get somebody confirmed by October 1. Now the Republicans are adamant about that. The Democrats want to stall and restall, but once again, I think it's because they don't have the votes. And look, they want a liberal judge. They want a judge who will bypass Congress, bypass the president, and frankly bypass the American people and rewrite the Constitution to say things that the Democratic Party believes. That's not how our founders intended the separation of powers to work. It's very clear under the Constitution. Congress makes the law, the president executes the law, the judiciary interprets the law. They can't just create laws out of whole cloth, they meaning the judiciary.
Now on Tuesday, there will be opening statements, as you mentioned, from all the members, including you. Possibly you said you might retain your time.
It'd be a lot of hot air. I mean, Tuesday all the senators get to speak for 10 minutes. I'm anxious. If it were up to me, I would just skip that part and let's go right to asking Judge Kavanaugh questions and let him defend his position. But they're going to leave time for opening statement. I'll make an opening statement, but I'd rather save my time to be able to talk to him about his judicial philosophy.
What do you want to hear from Kavanaugh?
I want to hear how he approaches cases. I want to hear what he thinks about the law. I want to know how he thinks is the proper way to interpret the Constitution. I want to hear him talk about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, in my opinion, is not an a la carte menu. Every right counts, and we were given every right by our founders, and from God, frankly. And some judges think that, well, I like this right, but I don't like, for example, the Second Amendment, your right to bear arms, so I'm going to rule against the Second Amendment. That's not what our founders intended. I'm going to talk to him a lot about the role of precedent, judicial philosophy. We'll talk about some specific kind of esoteric doctrines, like the state action doctrine, for example.
Do you have enough cases to look at to understand?
Yeah, he's written about 300 cases. I'm slowly making my way through them. I'm going back to Washington, obviously, for the hearings, and I'll do more reading on the plane.
Has Chairman Grassley provided enough documentation for the Democrats?
Oh, yeah.
Another complaint of theirs is that there hasn't been enough documentation provided.
That's nonsense. I mean, we've given them so much paper. I think 400,000 pages. They couldn't possibly, they meaning our Democratic friends, couldn't possibly read all of the documentation. And even if they couldn't, almost all of the Democrats said from day one, we're going to vote against him. So the obvious question is, well, why do you need all these documents if you've already made up your mind? Yeah. But we've given them over 400,000 pages, more than we've provided for any other Supreme Court justice nominee in the history of our country.
All right, well, we'll certainly be watching. It's going to be a fascinating process, and you'll be a part of it. Thank you so much.
It will be an interesting week. If I've learned anything, it's that crazy never takes a vacation in Washington, D.C., and next week will probably be crazy.
Oh, well put. All right, thank you, Senator. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry has joined a legal challenge filed in the U.S. Supreme Court that would limit LGBT workplace protections. The 20-page briefing filed in Nebraska represents 16 states that wish to exclude the LGBT community from federal discrimination guidelines. Reportedly, laws in 20 states ban employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Authors of the brief don't believe special protection should exist for transgender employees. The briefing points out that the law currently on the books says the definition of the word sex refers to the physiological distinctions between females and males. Hurricane Katrina made landfall 13 years ago, causing devastation along the Gulf Coast. Well, the U.S. Department of Justice wants all of us to remember when disaster strikes, scammers follow. Amber Smith explains how Baton Rouge is on the front line of a national effort to stop disaster fraud.
Phones ringing with fraud complaints following a disaster. It's a story Louisiana knows all too well.
After the 2016 flood, not unlike the flood or the event caused by Katrina, as soon as the federal dollars start rolling in, the fraud starts.
The U.S. Department of Justice established the National Center for Disaster Fraud to crack down on those crimes, with a lifeline of the national effort right here in Baton Rouge.
Locally, here in Louisiana, we are very fortunate to have an integral part of the NCDF located right here in our backyard. Right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we stand, on the campus of Louisiana State University, is the NCDF call center.
Employees at the call center listen to fraud complaints across the country, then send the information to the appropriate investigative agency. Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry, who was recently installed the president of the National Association of Attorneys General, works alongside the NCDF in the effort.
The National Association of Attorney Generals are going to be standing arm in arm in working with the NCDF and all of our federal partners to ensure that the public has the information it needs in order to help protect their property and those lives when disasters strike.
While the call center hopes to filter information for victims to get justice, prevention is still the best line of defense. For your local election headquarters, I'm Amber Smith.
And for ways to protect yourself from disaster fraud, just visit this story on our website. That's beourproud.com. A new NBC Gen Forward poll shows that the electorate, made up of millennials, will likely be a part of the so-called blue wave. No surprise there, but will they show up? The poll shows 46% of millennial voters say they'll vote Democrat, while only 26% plan to vote Republican. 27% said they'll vote for neither candidate, or they're not sure who they'll vote for. As we've reported, control of both the Republican-held U.S. Senate and House is in play. Democrats are poised to take over one or possibly both chambers, so candidates will be paying attention to these polls. State lawmakers are tackling a smelly public health problem: raw sewage, untreated, flowing out into the streets. It's a problem throughout Louisiana. Justin Campbell spoke to lawmakers on how they plan to solve the problem.
The sight and smell of raw sewage
basically smell like a porta potty.
Unbearable and also a public health risk.
Things like cholera.
That's just a start.
From cholera to virus disease to all sorts of elements that can be contracted from wastewater.
Terry Duffy with Viola North America, the company manages wastewater and treatment facilities in New Orleans.
I can immediately relate.
Duffy is attending Representative Paul Hollis's committee meeting.
With young kids playing in the front lawn and knowing that there was raw sewage in there, that can be very scary for anyone.
Experts are trying to find a way to stop the flow of sewage onto Louisiana streets.
I hope that what we can come up with is legislation that I can bring next year during the 2019 legislative session.
No word on how they exactly plan to tackle the problem yet, but Duffy with Viola says he has a good idea on how the problem started.
There's been a chronic underinvestment in the infrastructure.
Viola is hoping to secure a contract.
We're looking at a long-term plan, so we're looking at 5, 10, 15, 20-year plans for capital improvements.
They think will help stop sewage.
I would like to see it be fixed immediately.
From flowing into the wrong places. In Baton Rouge, Justin Campbell, Local 33 News.
And again, that was Justin Campbell reporting. He says this was the first Sewage Commission meeting, and there are many more to come. Stay with us. We're talking to another candidate for the race to be the next Louisiana Secretary of State. You'll hear from Republican A.G. Crow up next.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. As your local election headquarters, we're keeping an eye on all the races, the midterm elections. One of those races, very important, Secretary of State race. That's why I'm talking to candidate for Secretary of State, A.G. Crow. Thank you for being on the show, A.G.
Well, it's good to be with you today.
Why are you running?
Well, you know, I shared this with some friends earlier in the last week or so that even back when I ran for state representative, it wasn't exactly on my bucket list. People came to me as a business person and said that we need you to consider running for state representative. And back years ago, I answered the call and brought those business ideas and ideals into that office and served 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate. and could have served an additional term in each of those areas, but I'm a businessman first, you know, and I thought I paid my dues and enjoyed developing relationships and friendships. But basically, the same thing happened about 2 months and 2 weeks ago. People began to call me and ask me about looking at this position, and I said, at first I said no. I'm retired. I had a National Archives business. I started with 2,000 square feet in Slidell, Louisiana, grew it to 39,000 square feet, and then later we franchised this. And it happens to be a great deal of what the office is responsible for.
Archives.
Records and archiving, retention schedules, and chain of custody, and this type of thing.
Is that why this interested you?
Well, it did, and you know, a lot of us talk about the elections and how important it is, and certainly I agree that we've got to build the election process and maintain it like a castle and have multiple levels of defense and making sure that we're also playing offense. But a big chunk of this responsibility of this office is records and archives and maintaining private data. Every 3 seconds, somebody's identity is stolen. And in my business, what we did in the File Depot was basically brought in their records, brought in their information, kept them in a highly secure place, and actually barcoded them and gave them a retention schedule and helped manage that process. If it ever got into the wrong hands, so like medical records, for example, with HIPAA compliancy and all this, then it could mean trouble for that individual. As we were out around the state developing and opening up additional locations of our company, most of the time we focused on private businesses, but occasionally a public entity would call us and we would certainly go and meet with them and give them a quote on our services. And we found in many instances where private data, in public entities being stored, you know, private data, wasn't as secure as it could be. And I think that we have a missed opportunity that, as I'm elected as Secretary of State, that we can go out and make this a program where we can free up space, where we can reduce expenses for every single parish in the state and save ultimately millions of dollars. We have a detailed plan to do that. We look to bring in those techniques and those technologies, very common in the private sector, that's not being used now in the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, now archives is one part of the job. Another part of the job that a lot of people are familiar with would be elections. We've heard a lot of talk about Russian hacking elections. Are you concerned about the security of our elections?
Well, certainly as a citizen and additionally as the Secretary of State, I would certainly lead the charge and be concerned about not just being defensive, but proactively making sure and being vigilant to make sure that we recognize the fact that every day somebody wakes up trying to hack into something, and even the most secure cloud systems are you know, vulnerable to attacks. And so that is something that that we really need to stay on top of, you know, year in and year out. I will tell you that after 16 years in the legislature, 8 in the House, 8 in the Senate, this department struggles every year, like every department, with maintaining its budget of about $80 million. And having that knowledge and that expertise and knowing all about, you know, government, how it works in various departments, in this department in particular, I can step right in and make sure that our budgets are intact. And certainly with the voting machines and that contract coming up, the ability to be able to get that money year in, year out is going to be very, very important. And I think that that's what we bring to the table, that combination of legislative experience and business experience combined. That's probably why a lot of people have been calling on me to run for this office, and why we accepted that challenge.
And we got about 30 seconds. I wanted to mention a report from the AP talking about that contract to replace those voting machines. Louisiana is delaying contract negotiations with the winning bidder for the state's voting machine replacement work while it considers a protest. There was a challenge to that bidding process. Quickly, do you think that's going to be an issue going forward?
Well, it is an issue now, and it didn't have to be. It was mismanaged. Apparently, the perception of it was mismanagement, and so those things need to be addressed. And you know, we're talking about $95 million of your taxpayer dollar, my taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure we do it right.
Right. All right. Well, we've run out of time. A.G. Crow, candidate for Secretary of State, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Good to be here. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me, the website is agcrow.com.
All right. Thank you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Arizona Republican Senator John McCain passed away this past week. The senator was 81 years old. Memorial services have taken place all week to pay tribute to the senator that many called a maverick. His national memorial service was held yesterday, and a burial is taking place today. Senator McCain had requested that former Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush deliver eulogies at his funeral. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.